and moderating this event. So today's event, we are talking about making UK business happen in Nepal. We are going to focus on regulatory practices on energy and infrastructure. And this is being organized in collaboration with the British Embassy, Kathmandu. Today morning over breakfast at the Ambassador, we had a closed-door discussion on setting the stage for the conversations. The focus has been more on opportunities and looking back at how things have changed, because often we are talking about only problems and challenges. But when we look at, especially in the energy and the infrastructure sector, in the past 25 years, a lot has happened. So we want to put that as the context as we look ahead to this event. So we are going to be here for 2 hours. I assure you we'll be out at 3:30 for high tea. I think I'm a glorified timekeeper that'll ensure that. And this event, we are going to look at two E's. So I'm calling it 2 E's. In terms of the first E, we are going to have experts share. We have perspectives from a Nepali banker, a legal practitioner, a hydropower developer. They will be sharing perspectives, and then we have international speakers who would be sharing their perspective. The second is the most important part, is exchange of ideas. When events like this happen, and especially during the pandemic, we've realized that when you don't have in-person conversations and it's just staring at each other on screens, there's very little happens. In terms of the discussion, there's a lot on the screen, but what we enjoy is a conversation over coffee, a chat as we are biting onto some snack. So I think that's more important. And that's in that exchange of idea, we have exchange of thoughts and learning between UK and Nepal. We have a conversation, a formal conversation between Anna Shotbolt and Pooja Sharma, and there would be some conversations that will follow. We will not only listen to the conversations, we'll have some interventions from the floor, so be ready to make some 1-minute, 2-minute interventions, and we will continue these conversations as we break for tea. So from Nepal, we have from the Department of International Trade, Subhash Thapa, he's here, the DIT team from UK, Petra Lenihan, Zara Mathia, and then we also have Natasha Southwell from Trade Commission. Office. So they are all here, so please do take advantage of sharing with them, and they would also reach out to you. And we can network over at the high tea. So just for protocols, the restrooms are at the right. You go down the hallway, it's on the right. And in terms of emergency exits, it's marked. So just in case, God forbid, something happens, we know where to run. So with that, we would have in the program, we have three speakers in the beginning, then we have a conversation, another presentation, then a panel discussion, and then we have closing remark. That is how we have curated this afternoon. And for the opening remarks, may I request Ambassador Nicola Pollitt, UK Ambassador to Nepal, to come here, or come on stage to deliver the opening remarks. And for all the speakers, there's a screen up there that will tell you how many minutes you have.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to see you all here, and welcome to today's event. It's a pleasure to join you here and welcome you to this event organised by the UK's Department for International Trade. And as we welcome the new Government of Nepal also into office, this is a great time to see if we can work together to make the most of the potential that Nepal holds for trade and investment. I'm glad to see representatives from the private sector, the Government of Nepal, and the development community here. The more stakeholders we engage in these kind of discussions, the more likely we are to be able to make business happen here in Nepal. Supporting the private sector to invest in and trade with Nepal has been a priority for the UK government for many years. Since 2019, the Department for International Trade has had an office in the embassy in Kathmandu, and despite the challenges of COVID, has been working actively to this end. Our discussion today has a focus on regulatory practices, particularly in the infrastructure and renewable energy sectors. We have UK expertise in these sectors in the room here this afternoon. And as we welcome the new Nepali government into office, our collective engagement with their new leadership, is an opportunity for change. The topic for discussion today is also a priority for the British government as we work with Nepal and its partners to improve the business and investment climate here in Nepal. We have programs specifically designed to support Nepal's economic development through, for example, support to the Investment Board Nepal since its inception. Several mega projects have now gone through IBN's approval process, including Arun 3 and the Lower Arun hydropower projects and the Upper Trasuli 1 hydropower project, which recently reached full financial closure. We're also working with the government and development partners to support Nepal to put in place the Green, Resilient, Inclusive Development, or GRID framework, which will place an increased focus on renewable energy and infrastructure that is environmentally sustainable and disaster resilient. The GRID framework will contribute to the delivery of Nepal's nationally determined contribution to global climate change targets. The framework is helping to identify projects and matching those with funding for which international development partners have pledged up to $4.2 billion in new commitments. Even with such commitments, to achieve its NDC, Nepal will need international and private financing, especially for infrastructure and energy access projects. Development finance institutions like the British government's British International Investment, or BII, are paving the way for further investment by DFIs and ultimately private sector investments from international financial centres. It's up to Nepal to find ways to become an attractive investment destination. I hope that events like this one here today will provide the discourse for policy reforms that are required to improve the investment climate in Nepal. I'm looking forward to hearing from today's distinguished panel of experts on their expertise of working in Nepal, the UK and globally, and the lessons that can be learnt to make business happen in Nepal. I want to thank all of them for making the effort to be here today to share with us your insights and experiences. I hope today's sessions are informative and that we all take home some insightful lessons and actions from the event. Thank you once again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for reminding us of the GRID agreement that got signed right here. And we hope that the new government would continue to work on the action plan. So as the first presenter, may I request now Anirban Ghosh Dastidar, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, and he will give us a perspective on Nepal's landscape, financing energy, and infrastructure projects. Anirban.
Her Excellency Nicola Pollitt, the Ambassador of the UK to Nepal, friends from the industry, and everyone present. Firstly, I want to thank the British Embassy, all the related partners, for giving us a chance to speak today, and also Sujeev in particular, who hounded me. By the way, I'm a big admirer of the way Sujeev writes, and I was just telling him, why do you need us? Just read your books and we'll know what is right and wrong going on in Nepal. But Sujeev, inspired by you, I'll probably not try to make this a presentation. I don't know whether to call it a discussion, and I'm also conscious that there are a lot of experts in the room, some of who we work very closely with, and there are subsequent detailed technical discussions. So what I'll try and do is set a kind of context, and I know the topic given to me, the word which I've picked up is landscape, right? And as an international company and one of a flagship UK bank, we see the landscape a bit differently. Now, I'll start with something where what we often observe, and we'll get into the financing part a bit later, is we tend to always talk about the negatives first. And One is fresh out of meeting our board from the UK first time. I mean, we presented Nepal for the first time, and we are across 60 markets. So stemming from there, I just wanted to pick up 2 points on the macro, which I think all of us operating in Nepal need to bring out. Because when we speak to people and the kind of questions we get, there are 2 things which cause a lot of surprise, and people say, oh, wow, is it really? So when reserves came up for a lot of noise and discussion, you'll notice that we didn't dip beyond 6 months, right? And we are back to 9 months plus. The point that Nepal still carries 0 external commercial debt, 0, is quite a surprise when you operate in South Asia, given what's happening in Sri Lanka and now Pakistan and Bangladesh. And hence, the whole remittance story and the natural hedge to our deficits. The second point is, again, sorry, this might sound a bit like economics class, is the impossible trinity. I don't know how many of you remember in college the Mundell-Fleming trilemma, right? So Nepal has this pegged currency, independent monetary policy, and strict capital control. So whether you have a global crisis, the dollar crashing, you'll invariably find Nepal very resilient. And a lot of people don't realize that the peg to the INR is an acceptable risk. The monetary policy is predicated on that. So I'm just picking up a few nuances which is very different in South Asia. And obviously the last bit is the fact that we have a very healthy debt profile. So I'm not getting to the other macros. I mean, that needs to be parked aside, that Nepal's macro fundamentals are very different. The fact that it's a low debt distress kind of scenario, and the fact that it has that impossible trinity with respect to the Indian rupees. Now, one of the things we've realized that essentially when you talk about financing, it all comes down to trust. So what I'll do is I kind of pen down a couple of questions which probably set the context, and I'm sure it will get answered by some of the panels or it will get discussed. First question is, why do countries get rated, right? And why do institutions get rated? And the whole rating process in Nepal needs to be looked at. I mean, so to give you an idea, as an international company on Basel III with a home regulator, which is the PRA, imagine operating in an unrated country. So the whole capital allocation, everything else. And this kind of links into the financing. So the point is, do we get rated? When do we get rated? How do we get rated? The other thing is, why do advanced financial models prioritize risk weights of a project? We haven't seen that really coming in a big way into Nepal. The other thing is, once the due diligence is done, large projects are looked at, and the PPP agreements are in place, the environmental assessment and regulatory clearances are done. There are 3 questions we get constantly asked. How do we hedge risk in Nepal? What are the exchange rate implications? And how easy is it to repatriate funds? And these are constant questions we get from a lot of interested parties. So let me park that, and before I come into the financing part, I just thought, and I'm sure this is common to many corporates, many institutions, our multilateral partners, is our approach to sustainability. And the reason one is spelling this out is we try and discuss on these lines with the government and the administration. So our approach to, as a bank, our approach to is underpinned by our sustainability aspirations, which basically provides tangible targets for sustainable business outcomes and aligned to the UN's SDGs, which is now pretty much the practice. And the world is less than a decade away from its 2030 deadline to deliver the UN SDGs. Now, climate, net zero, sustainable finance is the flavor of the day. I mean, countless conferences, discussions, topics around this, right? Now, we obviously, given the kind of financing we look at today, we strive to be a responsible company managing negative impact of our activities through very strong environmental, social, governance, risk filters. And we believe that in the power finance, especially in Nepal, it can generate a lot of opportunity for inclusive communities. We have a dedicated sustainable finance team which brings together experience and expertise in managing environmental, social, governance risks. And finally, we believe catalyzing a new sustainable finance is very important in the regions where the financing gap for sustainable growth is greatest. And where aligning with a pathway to low carbon future, it'll have a very major contribution, and Nepal could be a great example, given that, our water resources in Nepal is second to Brazil, right? Now, a couple of milestones which kind of fits in to some of the things we want to do in Nepal. We already have a portfolio of sustainable assets of over $12 billion US, which is growing rapidly. Just to give you the sense of how international banks are moving, 90% of our assets are actually located in Asia and Africa. Last year, 1.6 million tons of CO2 emissions were avoided from our operational assets, and over 540,000 tons of CO2 emissions avoided from assets in construction. We also have currently in our portfolio globally 885,000 microfinance loans enabled and 20,000 SME loans disbursed. I think our plan as a bank is by 2030 to mobilize 300 billion in green and transition finance globally. Now, coming back to the topic, and like I said, there will be a lot of discussion after this. The technical details of infrastructure financing, if one puts a Nepal lens, and again, there are many experts in this room, but at a very high level, the investment needs are quoted at about 10 to 15% of GDP annually in the next decade. And they will require very timely and appropriate solutions. Nepal does have a huge need for financing. The other importance is unlocking the private sector financing. It's already at its peak. But currently, there are challenges which we see which need to be sorted, and going back to that trust factor to garner funding. One is, again, I might sound like a very boring banker, but most of you in the financing part will understand that there's an absence of a long-term yield curve to match long tenor funding. It's a technical problem. We obviously need deeper capital and bond markets where there would be an active participation for all sectors to create a healthy price discovery process. Project structures have to be sustainable. And the financial system needs to graduate to a Basel III framework where risk is better managed for long tenor projects. And today, most of the tenors are very long term. And lastly, obtaining a sovereign credit rating as a short-term measure to access international finance is very important. So from a financing lens, I don't know whether I'm stirring the hornet's nest, but clearly these are some of the measures which seem absent and which need to be fixed very quickly, given that the country will eventually get specialized, the financing will get specialized, there will be blended finance instruments which will need to come in. Today it's very vanilla term funding which you see across the banks, except for G2G agreements and where multilateral agencies have come in. So in conclusion, I think just make 2 points on this topic. Nepal does have a tremendous opportunity to leverage itself. As an example, is in the sustainable finance world. I think we as a bank actually are planning to use Nepal as a brand campaign globally on the climate agenda. Clearly, given that we have the snow line, we have the water, and potentially politics aside could be the answer to India's fossil fuel, alternative to fossil fuel requirements. But the last point which I'll leave with you, a few fundamentals need to be sorted out to better manage risk, tenor, deepen capital markets, so that the investments which all of us are trying to bring in, facilitated, match into these long-term projects which are readily available today. So I will stop here. I don't know if this made sense, but I just thought I'll try and sound like a bit of an author and deviate from and just spell out some points. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Suji.
Thank you, Anirban, for your remarks and some of the macro positives that you brought about, because as we were discussing in the morning also and last evening, that we tend to get lost in the challenges. Of course, there are challenges. And also, I think in terms of picking up from what you said, Anirban, is that 10, 15 years ago, we even didn't know what are the 5 things we needed to do to get our long-term stuff right. But at least now, as bankers, you've been bringing about, and we'll now hear from the legal perspective and developers' perspective, at least we are coming into 2 or 3 or 4 things that we really need to get done. And it's a good opportunity as the new government is there to talk to them and under different frameworks that the development partners are also working to work on those. Thank you, Anirban, once again. And now we would move to a perspective from a legal practitioner and Semanta Dahal, advocate and partner for trade and energy companies. He's associated with Abhinava Law Chambers. He's going to give a perspective on doing business in Nepal, covering policies, regulation, and he was recently involved in closing some of the projects on behalf of the government. Semanta.
Good afternoon, Ambassador Pollitt. I have Subhas also from the embassy, other experts and panelists and the audience. The remit given to me to discuss today is perspectives on doing business in Nepal, and that too I need to focus more on the policies pertaining to energy and infrastructure. I think to begin with, what I really need to do is just to make sure that I don't elaborate on the topic, I need to make sure I define these terms for my presentation and deliberation today, make it a little concise. So when I talk about energy today, I will limit myself to power, electricity, be that be in generation and transmission. I'll not go beyond electricity or power today. And then when I talk about infrastructure, I'll be talking more on the public infrastructure. When I mean public infrastructure, infrastructure meant to deliver public service as a public asset. And also where the infrastructure, in the infrastructure space where we need to bring more private sector so that the risk allocation and sharing happens between the government and the private sector under a long-term arrangement. So with that definitional remit, I'll then structure my presentation into 3 major parts. I think I'll try to give a snapshot of the development and the progress. When I say progress, I'll also touch upon achievements and failures that has been achieved, the progress that Nepal has made in the last 30 years, both in the energy and the infrastructure space. And then on my second part, what I'll do is I'll talk about the latest changes in the regulation and law, especially creation of this new PPP framework under the law, and then come down to talk about where we need to really move forward in solving some of the issues. So this is where I'll structure my presentation today. As a lawyer, I can talk a lot, and I can see that time is the essence here, so I need to be very precise in delivering my remarks today. Talking about the energy space, Electricity Act 1992 opened doors for liberalization in the energy, especially in the generation sector. Although it allowed for transmission, more private sector got involved in the 90s with the Khimti and Bhotekoshi coming in, and the introduction of the hydropower policy in 2001 meant that the risk of the market to offtake that market, NEA would sign PPAs on behalf of the government to make sure that the project that generate electricity are bought in a take or pay kind of a basis. And that allowed for private sector to really invest in the sector. And moving on, in around 2001, 2012, large hydro infrastructure like the Upper Karnali, Arun 3, I think Ambassador Pollitt also mentioned that, and Upper Trishuli, and currently Pratikji is going to talk about the Moshangdi projects, where true implementation of PPP framework has really happened with a complex arrangement of transaction structure, where there is a non-recourse financing agreements that the government have really signed to ensure that the international lenders and international bankers and international private sector can trust and have confidence over these agreements so that they can make investment in Nepal. And with that, I think we've been able to make some quick progresses, with Arun 3 on the construction, Upper Karnali, with Upper Trishuli making construction also, and Upper Karnali, although it is suffering a bit, but it is giving us opportunity to explore market in Bangladesh by selling power in Bangladesh. So all these are, quick success that we have really been able to achieve in the energy space. Also, I think before I leave the energy space, I want to talk about the transmission infrastructure, where we really couldn't introduce private sector financing in transmission. And I think the government now wants to introduce that. get more private sector to build transmission infrastructure. And for that, I think, again, we need bankable agreements like a transmission service agreement. And if that is possible, I think we could do a similar kind of structure that we've done in a generation project to invite investment also in transmission business. Now, leaving energy aside, I'm going to move to the infrastructure, non-energy infrastructure. Yes, I think the correct term to use here. When it comes to non-energy infrastructure, I think Nepal's, compared to the energy infrastructure, I think there's no equally promising case to share here. Especially, if I could name, I could only take a couple of examples actually in non-energy infrastructure where really private sector financing has happened. There could be few cable car projects, and again, cable car projects could be debated whether they are really a public infrastructure or not. And there are some hospitality sector like the hotels. I can take an example of Hyatt. There is some PPP element there because the land has been leased for the operator to establish that hotel and operate it for a certain number of years. So there is some PPP element there. But beyond that, I think it's handful. I can't really take many numbers and give some very encouraging story about private sector investment in non-energy infrastructure. With that, I think but the private sector, the new act was passed in 2006, the Private Financing of Build and Operation Act. That did allow some private sector financing to happen, but then the story again there is not very rosy. And the Investment Board Act came in, and now we have the PPP and the Investment Board Act. Let me just now discuss some points where the PPP and the Investment Board Act, where we need to more focus on. I think that's the more important topic. With the PPP and the Investment Board Act, we have now a PPP agency established by the government to look into the PPP projects. And then also, it has been equipped with some of the legal provisions to award concessions for development of infrastructure projects. But there are few issues that the Act leaves unanswered. And I'd like to highlight that first. One, first of all, is who determines certain infrastructure project is a PPP project or a traditional government project. I think that answer is not given in that Act. I'll take an example. Again, it could be I'm just going to cite an airport project. This is a hypothetical case. Government decides to build an airport in a far eastern region and says, okay, who decides that that project should be built with traditional financing that the government arranges, or should it be built through private sector financing? Who decides that? That answer is not given in that Act, and that complicates the issue a bit. Second, I think, again, there could be some overlapping mandates that Act doesn't answer, and that is who is the asset owner, who grants the concession. Again, I'm taking an example of an airport project. Although it may lie in the jurisdiction of the investment board under the Act, but the airport is really owned by the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal. That is the asset owner. So who is allowed to grant the concession, whether it's the investment board or whether it's the CAN when a private sector comes in and makes investment? That is, again, not answered. And there could be other issues like, and most critical, and I think the most ironical kind of issue is a 6 billion range investment can be approved by a Director General of Department of Industry, but it just becomes 6 billion 1 rupee, then it has to be approved by the Prime Minister with all the ministers sitting together. And why is that such a big difference there? Just for a 1 rupee change, you have to have all the ministers come into the room and approve the investment. So I think that's another issue we need to be considering about. Now, how do we move forward? I'll have 4 thoughts to leave. I think I'll elaborate on that and discuss about this. First of all, I think the government, the policy makers should really now have to realize that public funding is not adequate to meet the infrastructure needs of Nepal. And that's really important. That realization really hasn't happened. We still think we should borrow, government should borrow loans, government should arrange financing from international sources, and government should expose its balance sheet to finance projects. I think that should be not the case, especially if there are private sector who can bring efficiency, can come into the market. So that's one. Second one is we should make sure that these conflicting mandates and overlapping jurisdiction between entities are streamlined. We don't want the project to suffer just because multiple entities want to get involved in the project. So that has to be clarified under the law clearly. Otherwise, the projects will tend to suffer again. Third item that I think I need to, again, describe a bit more is to replicate the success that has happened in energy infrastructure into non-energy infrastructure. And the example that I can really cite are the agreements that have been signed for the Upper Trishuli project. Upper project, has been trusted by a range of international lenders, from AIIB, the Chinese lender, to British international investment, to IFC, to ADB. That means the agreement that government arranged for that project were bankable. So we should, and if that's the case, I think there are fundamentals of our energy infrastructure arrangement that could be replicated also in a non-energy infrastructure project. And if we could emulate that, I think we'll be able to make more progress also in non-energy space. And the fourth one, I think I want to leave for discussion is, should we make IBN a more focused PPP agency, or also should we make it a approving body for FDI? And this double role that IBN is playing could also could also look like that IBN cannot focus on both of these. So I think it's important that IBN is strengthened more to determine as a PPP implementing body of the government. So I want to recommend that IBN really becomes a bid process coordinator for dealing with PPP projects. They will conduct the bids, and whenever the implementation is needed, then it will get transferred to the entity responsible to implement the project. So that will really strengthen IBN and make it more focused PPP entity. So with that, I think my time is almost over. So I'll leave with one statement in the end, and that is Nepal's business environment for doing business in energy and infrastructure space is not demoralizing, I would say. But the anxiety that a foreign investor will face when taking up a project in Nepal because of the wave of approval formalities might leave them exhausted. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Samantha, for your remarks, and definitely our colleagues from the British Embassy would be listening, because as a supporter of the IBN, the conceptualization of IZBM and the support, I think there's been a lot of work that's happened. And today morning, the IBN CEO was there and very open to listen to some of these recommendations. So I think I would definitely, we'll take note of the final part that you mentioned. Thank you very much for giving a sort of, I would say, a very uplifting perspective of doing business in Nepal. So it's not only we are the ones who are selling Nepal, but I think there's really a value in coming and investing in Nepal. So before we move on to the next agenda, which is a conversation, I just want to take about 10 minutes for anybody in the floor to, please raise your hand. Somebody will be there to give you the microphone. Any intervention you would like to make for a minute or two, any questions you have for Anirban or Samantha, or clarification you seek, or Anna and others from DIT and Trade Commission, if there are any questions you have for our two speakers. We'll just take a few minutes break before we call in for conversation. So please raise your hands, and the microphone, somebody will come with the microphone. Okay, so this is a check in terms of if there are anybody who would like to make an intervention. So, okay, then we would move on to the next part of our agenda, and this would be a conversation. And as we mentioned in the two E's, one is the exchange of ideas. And we would have a conversation between Pooja Sharma, who is the thematic lead of energy at Practical Action in Nepal, and she will be in conversation with Anna Shotbolt, Deputy Trade Commissioner of British High Commission in Delhi. And they will talk about Nepal and UK, sharing experiences and building partnerships. May I request the two speakers to come on stage? So you have about 20 minutes for conversations, and about 10 minutes you can take some interventions from the floor and can help moderate that. Over to you.
Can you hear us? Yeah, maybe I can start. Hi, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to speak to you, Anna, here. Let's start with your work. As a Deputy Trade Commissioner, what does your work look like, and what have been your key efforts to bring UK investments in Nepal?
Thank you, and lovely to be here with you and here with so many experts in Nepal. So my role is, although based in Delhi in India, is a regional role. So I cover South Asia, so Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Maldives, as well as India. And we kind of have two objectives, or two pieces of work that I'm doing to create one objective, which is to grow trade between the UK and South Asia. I think the UK government is really clear with UK businesses that they should look beyond the UK, beyond Europe, and take advantages in countries like this, where, as we've already been hearing and we'll hear later on, have got so much growth and opportunity. So we do that in two ways. One is to run events like this. So my team, Savash, here in Kathmandu, has organised this with our team in London, who are also here, to kind of hear directly from business, from government, around what some of the challenges might be in order to do trade and investment internationally. So this kind of event is super helpful for us, so that we can then understand how we might try to improve that for the benefit of both countries. And then second of all, we do a lot of promotion. So we, in the UK government, if we want UK businesses to come out and do work internationally, we need to promote those opportunities. So the department back in the UK has a huge network of 300 international trade advisors across each of the regions of the UK. So we really try to make sure that people don't just think about London, that they think about the whole of England, Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, and particularly Scotland in the subject that we're discussing today has so much expertise in energy in particular. So we want to make sure that through events like this and missions that we're bringing UK and Nepali businesses together to think about how they might work together. And we've got a few UK companies that will be speaking later on, and we'll want to do more of those events as the year continues.
Yeah, interesting work, Anna. So it's about partnership, UK business, and the regional perspective as well, regional work as well. So what are, in your experiences, the topmost questions businesses ask when they want to enter into a new market? And if a new business asks you about Nepal, then what would you say?
That's a great question, and that's exactly why I'm here today. This is my first trip to Nepal since starting the job 6 months ago. So I'm here to be able to try and answer those questions when they ask. I think broadly, businesses are obviously wanting to think about what the opportunity is to grow and make more money, and so they want to know about what opportunities there are. And I think our role in the department is to be really specific with businesses. We don't want to go and talk to them generally about Nepal. We want to give them very particular sectors and opportunities, and obviously energy is one of those. But having spent the day yesterday with some Nepali businesses and with the government, there are obviously opportunities beyond energy and infrastructure. We heard about tech, we heard about creative industries, around education. So I think that's the first thing that we'd say to businesses, like what particular sectors are you interested in? And then the second thing they want to know is kind of how to do business and what partners they can work with. And I think particularly in South Asia, if you're first coming out to set up a business, it's invaluable to have a partner that you can that knows the country, that you can trust. And I think that's one of the key things that we want to do here in the embassy, is to kind of make that network understand which companies would like to work with UK companies, so that we can provide those opportunities. But now maybe I should ask you a question, because I'm being very talking all about myself. I wondered whether you might tell us a bit more about the work that you do here in practical action in Nepal.
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that question because when you talk about energy infrastructures, we usually mostly talk about generation, power trade, and transmission. But at practical action, we work with the grassroots community at community level, and we work to enable affordable clean energy access, meaning like we concentrate or we focus on access to energy services. So you may have a lot of generation, you may have bigger infrastructures and transmission, but if you cannot use that, electricity, for example, then that's of no use. So our focus is on increasing the domestic consumption of electricity, whether it is for income generation activities, especially for a woman, or for electric cooking, for cooking purpose. So that's our main focus. And we also work on agriculture and markets. So energy use has been mainly in the residential sector in Nepal. And we see a lot of opportunities to integrate them in agriculture value chain, for example. So that's also one of the other areas I've been working to help smallholder farmers to help them to use electricity efficient technologies. And I guess that's where we can also think of partnership between UK and Nepal in terms of energy efficient technologies for the agriculture sector, maybe digital applications or digital innovations to enable agriculture market, and also to support like to address disaster risk reduction as well, because that's also another area which we work in. Yeah, so it's basically more on the access side. Yeah.
Great, and I think that's where a lot of UK expertise is, in that kind of expertise planning work. So it's interesting to hear that. And again, we want to take these messages back to the UK to really sell those opportunities and try to get companies here and interested.
Yeah, thank you. That's very exciting. Yeah. So maybe I'd like to switch a gear. We talk about women in energy. We've been talking about that. And there's a lot of discussion about women in diplomacy. And I was reading somewhere that June 24th is celebrated as Women in Diplomacy. So I was wondering, why is that one particular day needed? How is the situation of, like women engagement or representatives in the diplomacy sector? How do you feel being a woman in diplomacy here?
I hope the day is needed just to celebrate it, rather than there be a big challenge. I think we obviously have our ambassador as a female, which is great, and I think the Foreign Office in the UK has particularly kind of put efforts in over the long term to make sure that its leaders and its female leaders can kind of see a career path to the highest levels. And I think you kind of need that investment over the long term and encouragement and training to make sure that we do have females in diplomacy. My experience over my career of 15 years is that has changed substantially. I think the Foreign Office in the UK can point at many of our ambassadors and high commissioners as female. My experience in India is similar across other countries. Lots of my counterparts are female, and actually many of my opposite numbers in the Indian administrative service are female as well. So I do think it's changing, and that's great. And I think the key to kind of building and succeeding at that is how we encourage future women to want to join diplomacy, and making sure that people can kind of do the job in their own way, that you don't have to be a certain type to be a diplomat. I think that's really good for there to be lots of diversity. But I think it's not just diplomacy, is it? It's in every walk of life. And it was interesting yesterday speaking at the Nepali British Business Council and some of the women there who are particularly trying to encourage Nepali women to set up businesses and kind of think bigger and more long-term kind of throughout their whole adult careers. And I just wondered what your perspective of that change is in Nepal.
Yeah, there has been some progress, but I would say we really need significant changes there. If I may talk about energy sector, then you can see the number of women participants in this hall itself. But you know, it's largely men-dominated. If I talk about energy sector. And I was reading a report by IFC where they had done a study on hydropower and what was the women engagement there. So it was found that you know, like 5% of the studied like hydropower, they had women in the survey work or design work. But when it came to construction phase, then the number was very negligible. And then when you talk about leadership position, then you would see very minimal. But I was also seeing a workshop yesterday and event yesterday where there were women entrepreneurs in the hydropower sector, and the numbers are increasing. I was inspired by that. But also in all other works, you really need more inclusive interventions, I would say. And you need to support women. Like, for example, I've been discussing with women colleagues in the energy sector, and what we need is we really need a better space to work. The policies and practices within the organization should be very encouraging if you want to encourage women in this field, and also the systems to train and mentorship women is highly appreciable. So a lot of things to do, and also not only about skills and knowledge, but you need investment opportunities also. So when you talk about having access to financing, then there is also a major challenge, and yeah, we all need to work on that. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it starts right at the beginning at education levels, doesn't it? How you get girls to be interested in maths and science and come into these sectors. And I think the UK government is trying to do that at the kind of early levels of kind of STEM, maths and science to try and appeal to both genders.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah,
should we ask?
I'm also looking at the time. So maybe ask for some interventions from the audience. If you have any questions or you'd like to make some interventions, then yeah, please
do.
Yes, Kishore. Maybe a brief introduction as well.
Okay, I am Kishore Thapa. I am the former Secretary of Government of Nepal and currently in Kathmandu University. My question goes to Anna. Very fundamental question. Most of the Nepalese, and I think even in the business community, they get confused with the name of your country. Sometimes it is used UK, United Kingdom, sometimes Great Britain, sometimes Britain, and sometimes England. And in the recent World Cup, there was an English team led by Harry Kane. So can you clarify what does these different names mean? Because in Nepali, it is only one word, that is Belayat. We don't use different names, only one name. Thank you.
That's a very good question. The first thing that came to mind is New York, so good that the UK named itself 5 times. We talk about United Kingdom, which is England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Then Great Britain and Northern Ireland is another way that we describe ourselves. Where it gets difficult is the sport, because we have a lot of rivalry within the country for football, particularly. So we'll have a Great Britain, Northern Ireland Olympics team, but when it comes to football, there's no way that people from England and Scotland could join together. Everyone wants their own shot, so it's more the sports that we start to divide ourselves. But yes, we use the term the United Kingdom. That's the best description. Good question, thank you.
Yeah, some more. Oh, yeah, we have two hands.
Good afternoon. My name is Rita Pariyar, and I'm a social entrepreneur, social activist, and recently get into politics bit of. My question to Anna, that like you guys are like, this event is all about making UK business happen in Nepal. So what if any, like, the common Nepali entrepreneur wants to do business in UK? So what would be the suggestion? Can you give me some idea, please? Thank you.
Yes, definitely, and that's one of the things we've been discussing actually yesterday. The UK currently has well, we're just about to launch a new developing countries trading scheme. So that basically brings down tariffs and makes it simpler for Nepali businesses to export to the UK. So that's something that we definitely want to encourage, hence why I've brought down the tariffs, and that will come into effect in the next couple of months. So in fact, the embassy in April will do an event to make sure that Nepali businesses understand the benefits that could bring. But we see benefits for different sectors, including textiles, food and drink. So yes, we definitely encourage both ways, and we'll be doing events to give a bit more of that detail.
Madhu. Sorry, there was a hand. Yeah, okay.
My name is Vanu Pokhrel. I'm a Group Managing Director at Urja Developers. We are focused on renewable energy development, and with a target to implement 1 gigawatt by 2030. So I have a very simple and straightforward question to Anna. We need investment to fulfill our development dream. Can you help us bring in investment? And if yes, how is that? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's exactly why we're here today, to kind of understand what that looks like, what the challenges are to that, and obviously London is a kind of a key financial hub, and how we might use that as particularly around green investment and transition investment is particularly is a good benefit. But I think what we need to do is better understand how UK finance can come into Nepal and what the risks around that are. So I think this is a really great opportunity for education for us then to understand how we can encourage finance into this sector. Oh, we added time.
Oh, okay. So we have, I think we'll take interventions, right, Anna? Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, this is Uttam Khanal from Ultra Group. I have some question for you. For Nepali small farmer, irrigation is the most challenge nowadays. Solar energy or sustainable energy for small farmer is very, very effective. Is there any plan for it? How can this program support small farmer as financing policy and technology development in this sector? Thank you.
yeah, it's about financing in the irrigation sector. There are government programs for irrigation facilities. There are other development agencies program that supports irrigation, not only irrigation, but other multiple use of water as well. And in terms of technology, the organizations which are working in the solar technology, they are mostly working for energy for agriculture. So they have like agriculture and irrigation component included in their renewable energy program as well. So, maybe for details, I think I can talk to you later in the after the event as well. But definitely there are schemes, and like even electricity tariff encourages the irrigation customers. So yeah, there are technologies, there are enabling environment. Just that you need to like connect those technology providers, skill providers with the people who wants to do irrigation. Yeah. In the front, Gannon, sir. Yeah, Madhu.
Good afternoon. My name is Madhu Singh, and I represent British International Investment. So my question to both of you would be, one of the impact objective that we have taken to achieve is inclusion, and it's mostly gender-focused or poor and marginalized class of people. And on infrastructure side, because the consumer often are hard to identify because the power is generally sold to the utilities. So we can't really make out who is actually consuming the power. So the only way for us to achieve this inclusion would be to increase women participation in workforce. And this is a challenge we face across the South Asia region. It's not Nepal specific. In fact, I would say Nepal has great, women participation in workforce is much better than, let's say, in India or Bangladesh. But what we have not been able to do is, despite, I would say, various types of encouragement, either given to the developer on financing side or running some training programs and done various stuffs, I think we still struggle to increase women participation in workforce, especially on infrastructure side. And we have been struggling as to if there is a way for us to figure out what is it that we should be doing to make it better, let's say.
Okay, I'll start and then, yeah, you can compliment. One of the things, in addition to skills, trainings, in addition to financial environment instruments, one of the other things which we are doing now is about agency building. So when you want to bring more women in the sector, you also have to talk about, to enhance their cognitive capacity, like they do have cognitive capacity that has to come. So decision-making power through agency building is one of the things which we have tried, which we have practiced actually, and that has worked well in the women entrepreneurs who are working in the remote areas. But not only that, ADB, with the support of ADB, they are working with NEA staffs, like utility staffs, women staffs, and that agency building work is really encouraging them to speak about, to voice their arguments, and also to invest in infrastructures. So yeah, I think the experiences from agency building from Nepal would be an important step to include that in other projects as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things for me. In India, the UK government has funded a programme particularly aiming at kind of teenage girls before they kind of finish school, to encourage them to start kind of really small kind of micro businesses, to encourage them to kind of think and be independent, that then might go into the workforce. And it was interesting yesterday when I spoke to the female entrepreneurs group. She was saying the other thing that really helps, particularly again intervention at a young age, is kind of hearing from other women that have been successful. And she was particularly asking about UK female entrepreneurs, but we were then talking about, particularly in the South Asian context, how can the countries in this region kind of work together? Because you can see some progress in bits of India, and how do we kind of link those two up?
front, yeah.
Hello, Anna. Ms. Gyalendra. I head Energy Development Council in CNI. I'm also board member for Nepal Britain Chamber. I just came back from UK, attending many financing meetings in London. What I can see in South Asia, after food, energy is the biggest cost for any country. Food, we are almost, the region is self-sufficient, although Nepal not doing good. But if you see the energy, you call any country, you name any country, India, Nepal, except Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, everybody dying because we have to import so much energy and we are creating so much this CO2 emission. And the South Asian countries, let's say commitment for COP27 is so poor because we are just delaying our renewable energy program a bit badly. What I can see, I have some suggestions also, what I can see that if the financing capacity of this UK linked to South Asia, hydro for Nepal, solar maybe for the India, or something wind maybe for the Sri Lanka, that's not the way going to help only South Asia growth. It's really going to help the global warming, minimizing global warming. So my humble request to you is that I think you should focus on that, the big financing. Even our embassy is working very hard for $500 million financing from UK to Nepal. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
No, thank you, and I'm glad that you were in London having those discussions. But you're right. I think this is a we want to increase the clean energy that is created here. Not only because it's a good business proposition, but it's right for all of our goals around net zero. And I think that's why the UK government, and particularly the Trade Department, is really wanting to encourage UK companies to do that. For instance, we don't work with, we don't try to push fossil fuel development, for example. So yeah, I totally agree.
We'll take last two questions. I have seen two hands, one over here and then one Suman sir. So yeah, last two questions, I think.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Ashish Agrawal, and my question is to Madam Anna. So whenever around the globe, when we talk about energy, it's always supply assurance or production, and supply is always a concern. But I think when we talk about energy in Nepal, we need to have a very different perspective, because at the present, our total consumption is about 1,500. The peak demand I'm talking about is 1,500 to 1,600 megawatts. And in coming years, I think 4,000 to 5,000 megawatt is already in pipeline. So whenever the consumption is talked, we are dependent on supplying to few countries. But as a representative from Trade Commission, I would like you to outline few industries which are energy incentive industries which can be collaborated in Nepal, and we have very cheap electricity, and also other manpower cost and everything is very cheap here. So if that kind of consumption is not thought about, I think in the coming days we would have surplus energy, and because we are thinking on very lines in Nepal right now, thinking in terms of substituting cooking gas with electricity. I think it is a very stupid idea to think about, because in Nepal the cooking happens basically 2 times a day. Morning we cook our meal and evenings. So what was the rest of the day? So I think the consumption has to be continuous. So I think still we are not very clear on the demand side how to consume. So at the end of it, I want to I would request you to outline few industries, or let us know how we can come in contact with you to find out such industries which can use a lot of energy, and we can add value to the economy. Thanks.
No, thank you. And the UK faces energy challenges as well. I think just as the war in Ukraine has shown our reliance on gas, and we face the same kind of pressure to think about how we diversify our energy supply. One of the things that the UK has real expertise in is wind power, a bit of hydro, and solar. And it's that expertise that we're really keen that the UK companies come and work with Nepal to make sure that you also diversify your energy supplies.
Yeah, last question.
Hello, thank you. I'm Suman Basnet. I'm the team leader at the Nepal Renewable Energy Program, a Government of Nepal program supported by the British Embassy in Kathmandu. My question is also to Anna. Anna, you talked about attracting private sector, and it's always a balance between risk and return. And when you try to bring in investment to a country like Nepal, the risks are seen as much higher, possibly with not the same sort of returns, increase in returns. So when you make a pitch to UK businesses to come to Nepal, would you just rely on a commercial pitch, or would you also have a social justice, a human development aspect to that pitch?
No, that's a really good question. Definitely, and I think also the diversification of kind of working in a new, a growing region of the world. But yes, particularly that point that was raised earlier around the net zero, how are companies kind of supporting other countries in the world to meet those targets. So yeah, and I think also one of the pitches is that we can hear about all of the opportunity that might take a bit of time, but coming here early, understanding the market, making good relationships, and kind of being here over the long term, we hope will pay off. So I think that is another important message. Thank you. Thanks so much for all of your questions. I think we're getting...
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a nice conversation,
Lovely.
Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Pooja. I think we heard multiple perspectives, and when we are talking about investments, we tend to look at financing, we tend to look at legal structures, but I think the softer issues are also important that came out, and especially issues around inclusion. And so it was very nice. I was sitting there and clicking a picture and to tweet, and it's in Nepal we generally have football team of men sitting out there and discussing. It's very refreshing to see two women, conversing. And I think day before I was tweeting about we don't play rugby, else we'd be having 15 people on stage. So with that, I would call in Pratik Pradhan to make his presentation, Vice President of Butwal Power Company. He's a practitioner, and he'll be talking about priority actions, regulations, standards, and recently involved in closing a pretty large project in Nepal. Pratik, over to you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, good afternoon and namaste. Thank you, Sujib. So, making hydro happen. I think it's happening, right? It is happening, but I think the topic is given here is for UK business, so I'll be kind of focusing more with respect to the foreign direct investment, because as a, domestically, a lot of projects are happening. So let me I have 5 points. First, I would like to take a minute just to give you a presentation for especially the guests from UK about setting the scene. So Nepal has techno-commercially or feasible project about 42 gigawatt, 42 to 45, and out of that, the government has right now set 1/3 of it as the goal for the next 10 years, which I think from the national perspective, Nepal's country's perspective, I would say this is a short-term goal. But definitely, right now, we need to live within that. And out of that also, they have allocated for different size project because of the past experiences focusing mainly on run-of-river projects. And just to have some of this guests understand, Nepal, we have a hydrological cycle, monsoon, where we have during the summer months, a very wet, kind of intense rainfall during the 3-4 months. But then we have a dry month. So because of that hydrological pattern, we have this kind of the energy generation also respectively following that. So out of the 15 gigawatt, we have allocated about 35% on run-of-river, and for peaking run-of-river, 30%, and about 30% for storage reservoir project, and for solar wind, roughly about 5%. So that is how it's currently allocated. And out of that, we have like almost run-of-river projects, it's all saturated now. And that's one part of the scenario, but at the same time, what I like to mention, I think our bankers might correct me more correctly, that right now to meet that 15 gigawatt hour, we do need FDI in order to meet the deadline. So that is one of the, I'm not going to detail in that. There's, I think, a shortfall of $10 to $15 billion still required according to the thumb rule calculations. So this is where I think we need to understand there is first the establishment that we do need FDI. So now, going straight into what are the issues for FDI, based on like Butwal Power Company, where we have had already 3 project development agreements done. One for initial Khimti 60 megawatt, then we did for Kabeli, then recently we concluded last month for Marshangli together with the Chinese part. But why do you need project development agreement? Project development agreement is basically because of kind of the weakness of initial earlier days when NEA was going into the red figures, they're not able to make payment. I mean, they have not defaulted, but there's always a tendency, since their books are red, the lenders always wanted to make sure that you have, there's a NEA's payment performance is secured by the government. So that is one of the key reasons. The other point was because there's a frequent changes in laws and regulation, rules and regulation on the implementation. So they want to make sure that these are not changed once you have the project development agreement. But for the locals, I think they have been arguing against this. Why is it given only for the foreign investor, but not, secure for the local developers? So as an investor for outsider, this is one of the requirements, project development agreement. And as I said, these are key issues. The other, from the financial perspective that you look at is, earlier PDAs, or project development agreement that we did with the project, was all secure because it was a dollar denominated power purchase agreement, which means you'll be paid in foreign currency. Because we are talking about FDI, foreign direct investment, we're bringing in foreign currency, and they want to make sure that they get paid in foreign currency, so there's no risk of devaluation of Nepali rupees. Whereas going from Khimti to Kabeli, where we had also dollar denominated power purchase agreement, coming to the current one, because of, the earlier one, there's already, I think, in total, there's 7 project development agreements that has been done. So out of that, the recent one that we did, because there's been so much delay, so much negotiation, and this PDA took also almost 2 years to complete. And we had to agree on Nepali rupees PPA with the understanding there will be a hedging mechanism that will take care of that, which is still not clear. I'm not going to much detail on the hedging. The Minister of Finance did implement in 2019. Again, there wasn't certain clarity on that. In 2020 March, they kind of amended it, but still, in terms of the sharing mechanism and the fees, it was not clear. And recently, about a few months back, Minister of Finance has called in the proposal, and only from government commercial banks. So there are only 4 eligibles, which are, I think the discussion is going on. We hope that they'll come up with a solution for that. So the next, I think I would like to briefly touch upon the techno-commercial issues and practices, because there has been, again, we had a Q40 design discharge for the capacity. And right now, they have recently changed that you could go to probability of exceedance of Q25, which means you can increase the capacity. But when you do that, the problem is, again, where you're going to sell it, right? So because they had recently, last, I think 1 year, NEA did benefit a lot out of selling power to India. Also, and when India does that by just choosing some projects, it's not random. So then, based on that, since they had increased their kind of, profit, so they are kind of trying to do, take take this as a difficulty for some of the projects that are coming in, especially they said if it's attached neighborhood and they have a bilateral, they would only buy power from there. So the others who are investing might have still difficulty. So this is still in the initial stage, and there's a lot of challenge on that. Then I think I'll touch upon briefly on the social and environment, because right now we have environment impact assessment in Nepal, which I think follows most of it. But when the international lenders are coming, they want to make sure there's a cumulative impact assessment done, or in the case of, I think, Apatrishidi 1, they did even FPIC, free prior informed consent. So those are kind of additional costs, but the rate that you get from power purchase agreement remain constant. So in terms of looking at that also, I think we need to make sure that those issues are well covered and there's a sufficient return to the investor. In terms of climate change also, we have started to negotiate that there should have a little flexible PPA so that in the long run, if the hydrology, there's a low flows consistent, that the power purchase agreement can be changed. Otherwise, there's a clause that you have to pay penalty consistently for the duration of your operation, which may be almost 30 years. So those needs to be looked at as well. So the other key issue I'd like to touch upon is the market. So this is where, because you have the capacity that you want to develop, but right now, the installed capacity is about 2,300, and a few days back on the 7-day average, it's about 1,500 megawatt is the demand. And even in the dry season now, 1/3 is supplied by NEA, and 1/3 is approximately by the private sector, and 1/3 is imported from India. So as I said in the initial stage, because of the hydrological, the monsoon season, we have a surplus and a shortage. So that is where I think because of this shortage, we have to kind of import power in order to balance. So that is why I think to have additional businesses or investment in hydro, making investment friendly, we have to make sure that there's an adequate market as well. And there's certain regulation from our bordering countries in terms of which ones they will buy or which ones. So we need to take that into consideration all together when we start investing. And at the end, what I'd like to say is, yes, they so-called investment-friendly environment. It is there, people are friendly, but there's a lot of uncertainty in going ahead in kind of investing in hydro. Thank you.
Thank you, Prateek. I know you could have gone on and on, but thank you for respecting time and giving us the context for our panel discussion that's going to begin. Of course, there's a lot of money that's required, and this makes more sense as we are going to get into how this money should be coming and what are some of the constraints. So we would move on to, and for these investments to come from UK, then what needs to happen, or from BII. So we'll get into a panel discussion here on policies, regulations, and standards on energy and infrastructure. And may I now request panelists to come on stage in alphabetical order. So Jonathan Cox, Principal Hydropower Engineer, AECOM UK, infrastructure consulting firm. Madhu Singh, Investment Director, British International Investment, BII, British Development Financial Institution. And Mark Enzer, he's a strategic advisor, Mott MacDonald, which is a global engineering management and development consultancy company. And we have about 35 minutes, and I think we can just do around 15-20 minutes of a few rounds of discussions, and then we can take some interventions from the floor. Are we all set? Yeah. So maybe we can start with a round of introductions on, who you are, what do you do, and what does your firm do?
Namaste, Haru. Malai धेरै खुसी लाग्यो किनभने केही भाषा अघि बुटवलमा बसे 7.5 सालको लागि एनएचमा काम गर्थे So I just said it's lovely to be here, having lived in Butwal on the Terai for a number of years. I'm Jonathan Cox, and I'm working for a multinational company called AECOM. It's an infrastructure company, so it is involved with building buildings, roads, and also with energy projects, such as hydropower, solar, wind, almost anything you can name in the built infrastructure, then AECOM has some involvement with it. I am an engineer, and my remarks will probably be from that point of view, because we have others from other specialities.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnson. Madhu?
Good afternoon. My name is Madhu Singh. I work in infrastructure and climate team of British International Investment. I am primarily responsible for investment in South Asia region. BII is UK government's development finance institution, 100% owned by UK government. And we operate primarily in South Asia and Africa. 35% of our portfolio is in South Asia. We have investment in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. Some of our notable investments in Nepal are WorldLink, which is an internet service provider. We had investment in NMB Bank, which we have exited recently. We have investment in Dolma and the famous Upper Trishuli project. I will give perspective from financing side because I have been into energy infrastructure lending for close to 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mark Enzer. I'm a strategic advisor at Mott MacDonald, and Mott MacDonald is a bit smaller than AECOM. We've got about 18,000 people globally, but we focus in on infrastructure as well, so energy, transport, water, and international development. And here in Nepal, it's mainly been on the development side. And so we provide consultancy services, advice to lenders, that kind of thing. And then from a personal point of view, my own area of interest is actually across infrastructure very broadly, and in particular, transformation of infrastructure and digitalization. So I'm really keen to talk about opportunities and where things can go and where the future is, and particularly around digitalization.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When we were putting this, curating this together, I was very excited because it's just also reflecting on your own personal journey, because at some point when the first independent power producer, Bodhikoshi, along with Kimti, came on board, so that was where I was involved and spent nearly 10 years. I have some of my former colleagues like Sandeep Shah here in the room. Good to see, reflect upon from doing 36 megawatt projects to now Nepal doing thousands of megawatts. So it's a long journey that has taken place. And so it's very excited today. I was listening to perspective. So we can go around to the next sort of round of discussions where you heard Anirban talk about the banking finance. We heard Samantha talk about the legal environment. We heard Pratik talk about making hydropower happen. So what are some of the reflections as you listen to these perspectives? So we can go on a round of reflections and then come to some of the specific questions I would have. Yeah, we can.
Okay, well, where to start? I think the first observation I would make is that here in Nepal, large infrastructure projects are even more difficult to do than in other parts of the world for a number of reasons, and some of them have already been mentioned, such as the whole area is prone to earthquakes. This means that the engineering codes needed to design the infrastructure require more concrete and a higher level of design. And then the terrain is not suitable for easy access, and very often there are not the roads. And then in the monsoon, of course, 100% certainty, some of the roads there will be landslides, and this makes it difficult. Then in the context of hydropower, the silt is a very big issue. because it is very hard and it can do a lot of damage to the equipment. All of this you know, but what you may forget is that some of these things are additional, they cause additional risk that you would not have in developing in other places, which may have very good infrastructure and may not have earthquakes or not be prone to earthquakes. And I think it's just a case of reflecting on that and being aware of it, because what it will do is it is going to add cost to the projects. That is to say, it will add costs if good regulation and good standards are to be met. If the corners are cut, the project may happen, it may be constructed, but then there will be many problems during the operational phase. And so I think from an engineering perspective, a lot of these issues I have mentioned, they can all be overcome. And the risks can be mitigated. I know that from a banking perspective, this is what it's all about. It is mitigating the risks to acceptable levels. So a lot of those risks are engineering, and they can be mitigated with the right design, the right standards, and the right regulations. So I think that's one thing. I have another, but I think
Sure,
maybe
please.
if we let somebody else
Yeah,
come in.
okay, we can come back to you again. Yeah, Madhu.
I agree with all of what Jonathan said. We have actually experienced quite a lot of these. I'm not so sure we can say that these are issues, but we have faced a lot of these in our Upper Trishuli project. For example, engineering, design, earthquake. The project literally washed in one of the earthquakes, and we had to rebuild it or think about, which added the cost, further cost to the project. So I think all of these are technical challenges, which are all valid. And quite a lot of there are in all hydro projects, but given Nepal and its territory, it makes it even more challenging. So that brings to the financing side of things. What has happened, and a lot of this has already been, in a way, said, like Anirban mentioned, that there are issues around foreign direct investment, or I would say any foreign investment. It's not just equity side, even on the debt side, there are the approval and processes are a little bit challenging, despite the fact that for that project, Government of Nepal was fully supportive. So it has one of the best contractual structure that exists. So I would like to also say some of the positives that are there. So the contractual structure works. 90% is there, international standard, bankable, takes care of basic risk, proper risk mitigation, allocation. All of that is fully built into the project, so that's great. Over the years, what has happened is in Nepal, the off-taker's health has also improved significantly. So NEA has done tremendously good job in improving its health post the policy reforms that have been carried out. Tariffs are more reflective of cost. In fact, in 2022, NEA has made $120 million of profit, which is unusual in the markets that we operate in, because most of the markets that we operate in, utilities are always loss-making, and you're always wondering where your money is going to come from, right? So that way, I think NEA has done, that's really positive. Other thing that has happened, which is quite positive for Nepal in general, is increasing export to India. I think electricity export to India helps Nepal in multiple ways. Some of it was also mentioned, like seasonality is a very, very Nepal-specific issue. Almost entire generation in Nepal is hydro, and it tends to generate in some season and does not generate to that extent in certain other season. Now, what do? Energy, or rather electricity, can't be stored economically as yet. Okay, so that's a very typical problem. What Indian market or access to Indian exchange helps is to get over the seasonality. Whenever there is surplus generation, it can be sold in Indian market, and whenever there is deficit, it can import. It also helps Nepal's economy, because otherwise that electricity will just go waste. And third is it helps in foreign reserve for the Nepal. So I think this is a very big and a very good positive step for the country and in general for energy sector. It does, in a way, and Nepal also continues to be an important country for us for investment. So we are looking for opportunities where we can invest. Of course, all of this comes with certain basic requirements. I mean, we would like, as Simanta mentioned, we would like some of what has already happened effectively or successfully to be replicated, like the contractual structures should be replicated. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for a foreign investor to invest in this country. You know?
Thank you. Thank you, Madhu.
Yeah, so one of the things which came across to me listening to the earlier speakers was just how common the issues are. I hear things which feel very familiar. Although I'm not familiar with Nepal specifically, I am familiar with infrastructure. And so I'm hearing very familiar issues. Things to do with infrastructure resilience, infrastructure equity, infrastructure sustainability. We all are actually facing these same things. I guess one of the other things which I was sitting there reflecting on was that a lot of the things I'm hearing about all seem like they're very addressable. And quite a lot of them sound like they're quite short term. And so what that meant to me was that it sounded like opportunities. There's definitely challenges. I heard the challenges, and they're real challenges. But looking beyond the challenges, I can see all sorts of great opportunities, and that sounds very positive to me. And I think fundamentally, the kind of underlying physics is good. You've got an awful lot of water and you've got an awful lot of gravity, and neither of those two things are going away. That's a fundamentally good thing. I also think that an awful lot of what I was hearing is connected. So the idea of going forwards, having more systems thinking, recognizing the connection, having a real focus on outcomes for people and nature, does open up an awful lot of opportunities. So just a little tiny example of that would be looking at health outcomes, recognizing the connection with air quality, recognizing the connection of that with having electric vehicles, and recognizing the connection of that with having a lot of abundant, cheap energy. And so it sounds like there's an awful lot of solutions which are waiting to happen. So as I was sitting there reflecting on what I was hearing, I was hearing opportunities, actually.
Thank you, Mark. Jonathan, you want to complete what you get started? Yeah.
Yes. So coming back to the second point, and it addresses or comes on to what Madhu was talking about and what Pratik was mentioning, and that is the seasonality of the rain. The monsoons come. There is so much water. In Butwal, we reckon that it could be 1,000 times as much as the normal flow coming down the Tinau Kola. So again, from an engineering perspective, and it fits really right in with Nepal, is the use of pump storage hydro. And I don't know whether this has been, whether that was in your figures, Pratik. It wasn't in, okay. So I perhaps should have said at the start that the work I do in AECOM is as pump storage hydro. And pump storage hydro, just to summarize very, very briefly for those who may not be familiar with it, is storing energy in water. So you need an upper reservoir and you need a lower reservoir. And at times when energy is needed, then water can be taken from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir. When there is a surplus, the reverse can happen. So in most countries, the national grids are stabilized by using pump storage, to put it bluntly. So as, fitting into the theme of a grid where most of the power is from renewable energy sources, we're desperately doing that in the UK. Everywhere is going the same way. More and more in the UK, we're going to have wind power, some solar. It is mainly wind, actually. But we are just about to start building a big pump storage hydro scheme a very big one. The first one that will have been built in the UK since 1990. This is something to think about. And obviously, it's the same thing as investing in a large hydropower project, only it's a little bit more complicated because pumping is involved. But of course, there are irrigation schemes in Nepal, and I know there is good experience in irrigation and pumping as well as in hydropower. The two are very similar technologies, basically. So yes, that's something to be aware of, and I think needs to be on the agenda, because as the grid extends, and T&D was mentioned earlier, transmission and distribution, it will come slowly in Nepal, but it is coming. And I have this same experience in Uganda. I went to one hospital, and it was completely off-grid. And then 10 years later, I went back to the hospital, and they said, yes, the grid has now come to the village. And it just changed the whole dynamics in that area. So I think the reality is, in Nepal, the transmission and distribution needs to be extended slowly and steadily. But as it does, then the demand, again, it was talked about earlier, will increase. But then other problems will come, and that is to keep the grid stable. And that is where the pump storage hydro also comes in. So I will mention that.
No, thanks, Jonathan, for bringing the pump storage. I know one of our project managers who used to be here, the Bodhikoshi, he's now in Montana, and he was also advocating of bringing the same technology here, and he was sort of pitching to be about why this is important. We'll go back to the floor to see if anybody can give some perspective. It's a very technical stuff, but yeah, but that looks like one of the ways in which you can stabilize. So mitigate what happens with seasonality. Let's I want to just change gears, and the discussions we had yesterday on the digital world and the world around infrastructure and energy, because we don't see that as much as interlinked and interrelated but then we are seeing more and more intricate relations as there are. We see that power grids can be just shut down by a pressing of a button. Two, having different ways in which access can be of a lot of services can happen, technology can happen if there's better energy. So there's this relationship, and Mark, you've been working on this, so if you just want to just share that a bit, I think that might be very useful for the audience here. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. So I guess when it comes to digitalization, there are aspects of wanting to kind of protect against the problems that might come, and so I guess instantly people think about cybersecurity and they worry about the threats, and that's a right thought process. We should definitely protect against the threats. But I guess the thing that I would most want to talk about are the opportunities rather than the threats. And really what that comes down to is about using data better in order to get better insights, to make better decisions. And so it's not just about seeing digitalization as a threat, but understanding the benefits we can get by getting more relevant data about our infrastructure, so that we can generate these insights, make better decisions. And then I think particularly where we can explore greater value is on the connections between infrastructure. So not just seeing infrastructure in their own separate sectors. So seeing energy separate from transport, separate from water. As we've already heard and as Jonathan has outlined, these things are connected. And so it makes enormous sense to have an information flow going across those sector boundaries so that we can make better decisions. And so it's kind of fighting against silos. Silos generally don't lead to the best decisions. And data and digital can really help us when it comes to breaking those silos and getting a helpful information flow from one ministry to another, from one sector to another, from one regulator to another, so that we can make better decisions. And in particular, better decisions at a system level so that we can address the system level challenges. And I guess what I'd like to kind of just chip in briefly here is that the big challenges that we face are system level challenges. So achieving net zero or achieving a circular economy or achieving climate resilience, all of these things can't be solved in silos. And so we need to break those silos. We need to get this information flow, which basically means we need digital.
Thanks, Mark. I think one of the issues that we were discussing earlier in the presentations that were coming up was this coordination issues, and a lot of times it's just the paperwork that's moving, so which can be digitized, and there's also a lot of the data that's coming in, and especially for if you data relating to river flows or data relating to so many other things that we can just basically capture, and we also have open source platforms that can be used. So I know yesterday as we were discussing this, I found very interesting, so I just thought this intervention was very important.
Yeah, and maybe one more thing that you've reminded me of now that you said that, is to make a distinction between data and insight.
Yes.
Because one of the things which you keep hearing from people is, I'm drowning in data, there's too much data. And it becomes unusable. But I would argue back that you might see there's too much data, but there's too little insight. And what we really need to do is get more insight. That's where the value is. It's getting value from data. So I'm not just here to kind of argue, let's have lots of data. I'm arguing that we manage it well and get insight, because that's where the value is.
If I can add
Please.
On digitalization. So during COVID lockdown, in many countries, we face this issue of payment from utility, because often these were actually a physical paper which used to get signed, and you had to go to the bank, get it delivered, get your money back, get your payment essentially. So when COVID lockdown happened and a lot of banks and branch weren't really working full-fledged, I must say, all those payments got stuck. And we were really, our experience of, or my experience of coming from India, where actually payments have become really, really convenient, even peer-to-peer payment. You can have mobile transfer. You have so many avenues possible of payment transfer, and I was like, oh, for 2 months we haven't gotten paid just because the check didn't get cleared, or somebody didn't sign the paper who is not available because, because of various issues. It happened even in Nepal. One critical approval that we required for change in a foreign shareholder from one shareholder to another, because it required intervention from Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, and maybe a couple of other bodies. What happened is that the paperwork essentially took almost a year, because all of this happened during COVID and strict lockdown. So digitalization, I think, would have helped solve this very small, problem.
Thanks. So I'm just looking at the clock. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 interventions on the floor, 1 minute, 2-minute interventions, and I can come from the phone. Yeah, there's a hand up there. Yeah, can you just pass the microphone there, please?
Hi, Sujeev. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandeep Shah. Thanks for reminding me of Botakosi and Khimti, the first 2 international investments in Nepal in the infrastructure, or you call it the energy sector. I happen to be involved in both of them. And yes, it's been a mixed feeling. Yes, the projects were very successful, but the risks were very high at that time. But I think the whole point of developing projects, infrastructure projects or energy projects, is to have a very good risk management system. Risk identification, management, mitigation, insurance, and the residual risks. It's not only the quartz sediments, Jonathan, you mentioned about. So yes, we did have a lot of quartz at Khimti and Botakosi as well. I think whenever you enter into a new market, I think for the British investors, this will have to be a very careful risk assessment. Technically, I think we are at a state where we have a lot of data. The data insights have to be, filtered through. It's the legal and policy issues, the financing issues, the markets, all of that have to be very carefully addressed. when we did Khimti and Bodakusi in the 90s, there were other risks there as well. And I've had made some publications on this now. The risk management at that time and the risk management in the current state. I think two key issues have come up now in the recent days. One is climate change. How is that going to impact your projects? And the other is markets, because of the excess capacity that may be coming online very soon. We have also looked at pump storage. Pump storage, probably for Nepal, we are not at that stage as yet. There are still a lot of intermediate steps before we get to a pump storage. We just have one storage hydro, small one, 114 megawatts in the system. Now, before we get to pump storage, we could look at peaking run-of-river projects. We could look at a hybrid system with solar. Solar could farm up the power from these peaking plants. And look at the capacity that is required within Nepal before we start talking about pump storage. Storage hydros themselves have a lot of ESG risks, resettlement, relocation. All of those risks are there, besides the large reservoir creation and reservoir-induced seismicity. So my view, over the last, having worked in this sector for more than 3 decades now, we can take smaller steps, intermediate steps, before we get to the pump storage. So that was my comment.
Thank you. Let's retake one more and we come for the final comments from the... Any hands up? Yeah. Is there someone at the back? No. Yeah, we'll take one and we'll come back to the...
Yeah, thank you. Gyanendra again. Actually, I was chairman for NHE for 10 years after you left. So I'm linked to NHE also. What I can see is that the water data is changing. That's one of the biggest problems we are facing as a private developer. We have developed, I was involved in Bottle Power Company. Now I'm in Hydro Solutions. We are doing one big project, 180 megawatt. That's the biggest project the private sector is looking forward. But the challenge is that the water data we receive from government is totally different than what we are measuring right now. And we can measure for a couple of years only. But still, I assure Madhuji that the Bodakusi was flooded for 3 times badly because of all this problem. No? Khimti, many projects flooded. Still, the finance was intact. They paid the debt, loan, everything in time. So the risk is very heavy, no doubt. But the finance people are getting money from the hydropower perfectly in Nepal. But the cloud burst is creating another problem. The flood we designed 20 years one time, it's coming every 2 years. So these are the new problem coming up. But I didn't see a big problem for the finance, Madhuji. You'll get the money back. Come to Nepal. What I suggest, rather than going to individual project, to the British Embassy, if you link with the Nepalese Finance Ministry and go for the one big fund, and the big fund can go to the private sector through private banks, it will be much faster. Otherwise, if you go one by one bank, it will be very tedious and the process will be very long, in South Asia. We are in South Asia. Thank you.
No, thank you. Actually, we are evaluating one such financing to a local bank. Basically, financing line which will be used for development of hydro projects. So we do realize that direct financing will be time consuming. So it's better to go with with a local bank who we can finance, who ends up financing some of these hydro projects, especially for smaller projects where it's difficult for us to do that.
Okay, we'll take the final comment from that. And then we'll go back to 2 minutes final comments and interventions.
I just would like to add, I'm Banu again. When you talk about financing, I think we have to make it affordable as a borrower in the end. So my experience is, we have so many risks, technical, commercial, country, and, long list of risks. And when we translate that risk into cost, it becomes simply very difficult to justify hydropower projects with NPR-based PPA or similar kind of off-takers arrangement. I think this is my suggestion. If you can think of some hybrid instrument where you could, channelize the fund and land it in the NPR-based instrument. It's some innovative instrument in NPR. That calls for a lot of policies and regulatory, I would say reform, because we don't have any policy or a regulatory instrument as such as of today. So this is my suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah, we can have final round of comments and any responses you want to make from issues that have been brought in. Yeah,
okay,
we can
just a very quick comment on the interventions, just on climate change and, for example, the design standard for floods. In the UK, the pump storage hydro scheme I was talking about, it's being designed for a 1 in 1,000 year flood. So just as a bit of context. In terms of pump storage generally, one thing that can be done with pump storage, just like with HEP, you can have a fairly small scheme. It does not have to be the biggest all singing, all dancing scheme first. Just as with those small HEPs that were UMN was involved with in the 80s and 90s, because before Kimpti there was also Jimrook, 12 megawatts, Antikola, fantastic scheme, with irrigation built onto it. It has transformed Gulmi and that whole region. I think any of you who have been through Gulmi will remember that. So yes, so that's a point on that. And then, I can't read my writing, but yes, that's my feedback. My final comments are just to look back, and I know other speakers have been quite positive about, or tried to pick out positive things in the past. Remember things like Goba Gas and microfinance, that has also been mentioned. Goba Gas, there are, I think, around 300,000 to 400,000, I could not get an actual figure, installations across Nepal. So if your perspective is from the village, then that technology may have made a very big difference to your life. If your perspective is from the town, say Butwal, Janakpur, you will have a different perspective. If your perspective is Kathmandu Valley, you may be thinking more about big infrastructure projects. So think about perspective. I see time is short. I have to say much more, but I shall stop there.
Yeah, thanks. Madhu?
I'll keep it short. Despite all the challenges, I feel that things in Nepal seem to be much more positive than what we are experiencing in a lot of other countries. Imagine if you were dependent on gas today, where you would be. So that way, I think energy sector looks the future of energy sector in Nepal looks much brighter. And we are keen to invest. Our mandate is to work in challenging countries. So it's not that just because we face challenges doesn't mean we are not inclined to invest. I think we are still looking for ways and means to deploy capital in Nepal, including working around how to make do with local currency PPAs. We are trying to figure out if there is a way for us to solve for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, and just a brief response. I very much agree with the first question and the first comments, that the challenges we're looking at here are definitely not just technical, they're really socio-technical. So we need to address the human and organizational factors. That's true across infrastructure globally, actually. And then that, for me, leads into a general comment, which is that I think that when we look forwards and we look for transformation and we look towards opportunities, then we also have to look beyond just projects. So projects are brilliant, projects are really important, and the best way of getting things done. But infrastructure isn't just about projects. Infrastructure is about what we already have. And the more we build, the more we will already have. And so what that means is that we need to have more focus on the systems and the performance of the existing systems, getting the most out of what we've already got, and the operation, maintenance, and use of the systems, not just the delivery of new assets. And of course, digitalization can help with that. And then one tiny point on finance. Again, this is a digital point. I would urge people involved in finance that you have a kind of a condition, which is that you don't actually invest in projects or in organizations unless they can demonstrate that they manage their data and their information effectively. That's an important thing. That will help to drive the kind of change that we need. And then a final comment. I think for me, something that sums up for me kind of all of these thoughts are that when it comes to addressing these big infrastructure challenges, we really do need to be outcomes focused, not just output focused. It needs to be systems based, so we need to see the connections. It's not just about energy, because energy is connected to transport, is connected to telecoms, so we need systems based solutions. And then it needs to be community enabled. This is something that won't happen in silos, so we need to work across silos and be collaborative in the solutions. And I feel that's a general thing. It will be true in the UK just as it is here.
Okay, this is a great session we had. It was a lot of learning. I take away 2 points from here. One is that I think there are new problems, so which means that we have to look for new solutions. And I think when, like as Sandeep was saying, and when we are looking at issues and policy and others, we are looking at energy from a perspective of scarcity, when the energy was scarce, and now we are talking about we are going to be abundant. There's going to be, so it requires a new framework of thinking. I think that's the takeaway I have from the session. Thank you. A round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. And as the panelists would move down, I would now like to go into the final session, and I would like to request to Anna Shotbolt, Deputy Trade Commissioner, to come on stage to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, Sajeev. And I promise there'll be closing remarks because you've heard quite a lot from me already, and I know there's high tea through those doors, so I will keep them short. I think the main point of me speaking now is just to say a really big thank you. Thank you to Nicola, Ambassador, for opening today's session. Thank you to Savash at the Embassy for organising all of this, along with the team from London. And thank you to Bede and Sajeev for organising such a well-kept timed event. It's been very impressive. I think you said at the beginning that your two objectives were to hear expertise and to exchange knowledge, and I think that we've been really successful on both counts, and I know we want to do more of that in the networking session afterwards. I think my reflections are, after nearly the end of my second day in Nepal, is just how much progress has been made over the past 10 years. I've heard it from here today and in numerous meetings, but also around the ambition for the future. And you're making great strides in developing the infrastructure and renewable energy sectors. And the UK government is really proud that we've been able to support some of that. Nicola talked about the support to the Investment Board of Nepal being one of our flagships, but also in some other programs that we've been working to improve the business investment climate and strengthening the financial sector. So we're really pleased to be working with you to grow these opportunities. And I think this afternoon's been really helpful to hear about some of the opportunities and the ambition around the 15 gigawatts of energy and in the wider infrastructure sector, particularly around distribution and storage, but also being honest about what those challenges are, although it's been nice to hear that everyone thinks that they're not insurmountable and that we can find solutions, and that's what we hope the UK can support with too. But it's great that we're honest about those, I think, especially when we're talking to potential investors. So I really hope that, that the audience has found it helpful, and I think that's the last thank you. Thank you for coming. We would be just speaking to ourselves if you weren't here, so I'm really grateful for you taking the time, and please do come and talk to the UK companies and expertise we've got here today. We've got, as you've heard, Mott MacDonald, AECOM, BII, and the wider team from London, so please do come and find us, and I really hope that it's been a successful afternoon for you all and you enjoy the high tea. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I think bilateral trade and business is a continuous process, and I think today's event has just reinforced that. And it's perhaps also is a new beginning, as we have an open moment, as the ambassador was saying, we have a new government, and it's a good time to recalibrate the way we think about bilateral relationship and how countries can engage with each other. So before I close, again, a reminder that apart from the speakers, panelists, there's Subhash Thapa from DIT Nepal, DIT team from UK, Petra Lenihan, Zara Mathia, and Natasha Southwell from the Trade Commissioner's office is here. So do chat with them over high tea. And I cannot end without thanking the team behind this event, Nasala, Sakshi, Krisha, and the team at Bead Knowledge Center, the division of Bead Management that curates and convenes such events. Thank you all, and please do join us for high tea. Thank you.